Hello, everyone, and welcome to our post-Baku pre-Miami live stream. Welcome wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you're in. If you've had to get up early, apologies. If you're staying up late, apologies. Here in Spain, it's 1 o'clock. Pretty chilled. Good time for me, obviously, but that's just me. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. Lots to talk about, I think, not the least of which is the result of the poll that I put out on I think it was the Monday or the Tuesday after Baku. I said I'd keep it open till Friday, which I will. But so far, we've had 11,000 of you replying to the poll in answer to the question, did you like the sprint element of the Baku Grand Prix? If it had been sprint cars, I think I would have loved it myself, to be honest. I love American sprint car racing and midgets. Anyway, that's by the by. The sprint element of Baku. And 11,000, before we get on to the results, 11,000 is a lot. And that, I think, reflects what people feel about this sprint race aspect of Formula One and what it's doing to Formula One. And it shows that they care about this. They're passionate about it. And that's a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing that we're passionate about the elements of the sport. And it's a good thing that you're reacting to. And to put that 11,000 into perspective, consider that in most countries, the UK being a very good example, when they're doing TV ratings of any show, it's based on 10,000 units that are spread throughout the country. And then extrapolate that to get their viewing figures. 10,000. So we've actually got the same capture base as TV ratings. 11,000, in fact. It's a little bit more. So it's really, really, thank you very much, first of all, to everybody who took part in the poll. And if you haven't, you've still got till Friday to do it. But talk about exit polls. Don't need to see where this one's going in order to understand where people feel about sprints, because of 11,000 of you, 69% did not enjoy the sprint race, the sprint aspect of the Baku Grand Prix. And of the remaining 30%, it was evenly split. 15% didn't like it at all and 15% are neutral. But that's kind of by the by, it's kind of moot, because that overriding number of 69% is astonishing, really, bearing in mind that Liberty, and it was, you got to say, it's Ross Brawn's baby. I mean, he's always been behind this whole sprint thing. That Liberty and Ross did this as a result, came up with this concept as a result of, guess what? A fan survey. And here we've got now the fans saying 69% of you that you didn't like the way it was shown in Baku. Now, that doesn't mean to say necessarily that you don't agree with the concept of sprint races in general. What you're saying is you didn't like the format in which it was shown in Baku. But we've got to add a rider there, which is the format in which it was presented in Baku is the latest development of the sprint race. And it's been honed, it's been tweaked, it's been modified according to, you would think, things that have gone wrong and direction in which they should be going. But 1 year on, to be going into a situation where 69% of the fans don't think it's a great idea and would rather not have had it, somebody is not drawing the right conclusions, or, dare I say it, maybe the initial conclusion wasn't correct in the first place. Because it always comes back to my thing about surveys, which is it's based on the question you ask. And if you ask a basic question as part of a big survey, would you like to see more overtaking in Formula One? I don't think there's anybody on the planet Earth who wouldn't say, yes, I'd like to see more overtaking. But of course, if that overtaking is a result of, say, more DRS zones or a sprint formula race, which condenses everything down to 12 laps or 15 laps or 17 laps and forces passing maneuvers and gives you a short, sharp burst of adrenaline, that's a different question. And I think it's a little bit like Brexit, really, isn't it? There were a lot of people that didn't vote to leave the EU. I shouldn't get into politics here. But the questionnaire never said, would you like to leave Europe? Bear in mind, these are the things that are going to happen. And would you like to stay in Europe? Bear in mind, these are the things that are going to happen. It was just like, leave or stay. And I think that was the case with the survey. Would you like to see more overtaking? Yes, I would, of course. Tick. And this is what's happened. So we got the sprint race, and 69% of you didn't like it in Baku. So I will be feeding those results back to Liberty. I'm not expecting a response because I'm probably not the only person in the world to have done a poll after Baku, A, and B, I'm sure they know already, probably from fan reaction of their own, that it wasn't a great success in Baku. It wasn't liked in Baku. But nonetheless, I'll be feeding it back. I've got my own connections there, and it'll go back, and hopefully something will come up that will be more appealing to the fans. And we can talk about it now in the live stream, I think, why many of you didn't enjoy the sprint race in Baku. I think a lot of you felt it was because the cars were locked into Parc Fermé so soon in the weekend, and particularly in the case of Mercedes, who were quite vociferous after the Grand Prix, saying, well, we were locked into a setup that we couldn't get out of because of the sprint format, and, roll on Miami. Of course, it was a similar situation last year as well with the sprint format, and we saw that with Red Bull in Brazil. They openly, well, I don't know if it was openly, but for a fact, they didn't get their ride heights correct on the Friday, and they could do nothing about it into Parc Fermé because it was a sprint weekend. And they did the rest of the weekend with incorrect ride heights, which is why they were so slow and so hard, relatively hard on tyres. And so that's not the first time that's happened. And other teams have also been victim of this very early Parc Fermé. So maybe what they should be coming up with is some way of having the sprint race, maybe self-contained. I think quite a lot of you liked having it on a Saturday so it didn't impinge on qualifying for the Grand Prix on the Friday, or vice versa perhaps. But maybe we should do it in such a way that it doesn't also affect a team's ability to set the car up to the most reasonable time prior to qualifying. And to do that, of course, you've got to go back to Grand Prix qualifying on the Saturday. So lots to talk about and lots to think about, I think, if you're at F1 at the moment and thinking about where to go with sprint racing in the future. But as I say, I will be filtering these results back. Now let's start. I mean, a lot of you very kindly have already sent comments and questions in long before we went live. I should say here, just as just to cover myself, for some reason, incredibly annoyingly, and I've tried 57 different permutations, my router is very nearby, and the Wi-Fi, hopefully at the moment, it says excellent connection, so it's on Wi-Fi. Normally I would have a hard wire connection, Ethernet connection, and for some reason, whenever I plug in the hard wire, it's not working. I've got a guy coming tomorrow to look at it, and I'm sure it probably needs a new router, which I'll get tomorrow. But we are on Wi-Fi, so if anything becomes shaky, and I can see here excellent connection, but if it's not excellent, I've actually changed the bit rate, so hopefully it'll be okay and will compensate. But I just wanted to let you know that as a rider going into the live stream. But thank you very much. Everybody's already put in, sent questions and comments. So John Villatech, I should start with him actually, because he's been emailing me quite a lot about the sprint, saying how much he hates it and thinks it's an abomination and actually really affects our enjoyment of a classic Grand Prix, and particularly did not like the Parc Fermé aspect of it. So yeah, I've given him a mention at the top of the show. He's quite critical of Ross Brawn as well. I think that's probably unfair because Ross isn't just doing these things on his own. He's got a team of people, and he's done a lot of very good things as well. I'm a bit of a Ross Brawn fan, having known him since the Williams days, since he was at Williams, let alone Arrows or other places he's been, Benetton of course, and Ferrari too, not to mention Brawn himself as a team. So anyway, there we go. John Pillage, so Spillage 93, hi Peter, love your work and your shirts. Well, sorry to be wearing a boring black t-shirt today. I'm quite sure that happened. First one that came out of the shelf, I think. Now it's 2-2 in race victories. It seems Checo is making a better fight of it than expected. Do you think that he can realistically beat Max to the title? Well, I think I've always said, the risk of banging on about it, he's always been really good in these traction episodes, which means that he's always going to be pretty good at most street circuits, Singapore, Monaco, Baku, and so it's been proving. And I think there's a very good chance he'll win Monaco, and probably a very good chance he'll win Singapore. If you go to somewhere like Miami, there are a few places where Checo will come into his own, but I think that Miami is one of these typical circuits, modern circuits, where you've got very long straights, a bit like Baku, but you've also got a number of medium speed corners as well, unlike Baku. And for those, there'll be much more of a compromise. Those will demand more of a compromise setup from all the cars and the teams. That won't affect the way it won't affect Perez's ability to do a great job on the slow corners in Miami, out of the slow corners. There aren't that many of them for a start. And well, more importantly, there aren't many long straights after the places where he can really do a good job with the traction. I mean, the point about Baku and that sector 1 is that because he's so good there, he then got the reward with the long straight. It's very unusual to have a circuit with these 90-degree corners and long straights afterwards, rewarding what he's doing, and that's why he was so good in sector 1, and that's not the case in Miami. And I think it's fair. I'll probably come back and regret these words, but I think there are enough medium speed corners with a compromisey car that isn't absolutely perfect on those medium speed corners for Max to do his thing again, and to be able to play with the variables as he does, and massage the car and maximize what he's doing on any given lap, on any given fuel load. And I think that's where Max will come back into his own in that sort of situation. That applies also to Barcelona. It doesn't apply to Monaco, because you're kind of locked into what's happening there. And there are places where Perez can really do well with the way he uses the right foot, particularly up the hill out of Sanderboat. And then you get to the circuits with the faster corners, Silverstone, Canada, Austria. Difficult to see where Perez would be quicker than Max around Austria. I just can't see where he would be. Maybe out of turn 1, but I mean, turn 1 isn't one of those sort of traction-y type corners. It's a corner to do with turn in and balance. And I think, well, put it this way, I think Max can, whatever he may lose on throttle application out of the corner compared with Perez, he will gain with his short entry into turn 1 in Austria. Turn 2, likewise. And then Max is on his own in those other places, I think. So in answer to your question on the other one, I see Perez, in my crystal ball, I see Perez winning at least another, 3 races, if not 4. But I don't think that'll be enough to take him to the championship ahead of Max. No, I don't. I mean, he's the only guy that's going to be in a position to put any pressure on Max for the championship, because he's in an RB19, which is a pretty good car. And of course, anything can happen in terms of reliability. But in terms of sheer wins, it's going to be, I reckon it'll be 6 wins, Perez, and the bulk of them to Max, with, Ferrari and maybe Aston or Mercedes squeezing in a win or 2 at some point. So that's how I see it, kind of asking the prediction. But, who knows? Who knows? Sam Lloyd: saddens me that we're trading purpose-built racetracks for the spectacle of Vegas. I'm worried about the actual racetrack, and we end up with DRS trains all over the field, same as Baku. Yeah, well, guess what? It's a relatively cheap and easy way to guarantee overtaking, isn't it? Well, kind of guarantee overtaking. We had 2 DRS zones in Baku, and there wasn't a lot of overtaking. And don't forget, these cars are more difficult in terms of following the car in front than they were in 2021. The upgrades they've had over the winter in terms of the regulations to make the cars less subject to vertical oscillation, porpoising, they've kind of cured all that. But in doing that, they've made it more difficult for one car to follow another. So DRS isn't going to go away in a hurry, and I think it's still seen as a relatively, as I say, cheap and easy way of guaranteeing some overtaking. And I don't see any sign at the moment of F1 saying this isn't classic Grand Prix racing, it's contrived, it's not really what the purists want. We're going to go back to pure Grand Prix. That isn't going to happen because they want lots of overtaking. It's a TV sport, times a billion, and it's a good way. Long straights with lots of DRS. I think many of us probably thought, Jeddah's a bit of a non-event as a racetrack. But as a spectacle, as a Grand Prix show that lots of people who normally don't watch Formula One suddenly saw, they think, wow, this is great, isn't it? Look at all this, pass, repass, all slowing down for the last corner so they can get the DRS. It's all a bit, it is contrived, but then so is a lot of modern life. A lot of what we have today is quite contrived and not. And I mean, it comes back to special effects, doesn't it? In movies, really, that's what we're talking about. Effectively, excuse the overuse of the word, but effectively DRS is Formula One's equivalent of a special effect. And, it's not going to go away. In the same way, special effects are not going to go away. It's much easier to create a special effect than it is to go out into do a David Lean and go out to the desert and film Lawrence of Arabia. If you can do it all at home in Hollywood, do it. And if you can create a circuit that fits into the geography of a street circuit and it's the town you want to be in, the city you want to be in, just throw DRSs at it and Bob's your uncle. So I think that's what's happening, Sam. And a rejoinder, second question. Love your enthusiasm and the love of traditional Formula One. I hate sprint races. The sooner they go, the better. Okay, Sam. Well, you know where my heart is with you, and I'm worse than most of you because I still have this dream, going back in time and lying in the middle of the Champagne country of Reims on a sleepy, sunny Thursday afternoon of the French Grand Prix weekend, knowing that there's 3.5 hours of practice going on around me for the French Grand Prix, and there's Jim Clark, there's Graham Hill, there's John Surtees, and they're all going around this circuit for 3.5 hours on a Thursday, and I'm, have a bit of a snooze in the middle, bottle of wine. Those days are over, aren't they? But the point I'm making is I quite like the pole to be won by the fastest guy in the fastest car. And I quite like the race to be won by the fastest guy in the fastest car. And if he wins it by 3 laps, I'm going to take my hat off and clap him, because I think, that's what racing's all about. It's not about actually contriving lots of overtaking. Anyway, got some very kind people doing some super chats here, which is very kind. I think I should address those. Okay, I've pressed a button, but nothing's appeared. Live chat, all messages have been okay. It's just telling me what it is. But people are actually. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, here we go. This is from Turbo GSR. Thank you very much. You're doing a super chat here. Thank you. Your thoughts, Peter, on the Aston Honda rumors for 2026. Also, nice date just Jubilee bracelet is classic. Oh yeah, well I've had this watch since 1981, so yeah, it means a lot to me. White gold bezel, stainless steel, love it. And I don't make them like that anymore. It's still going perfectly. Mechanical wind, obviously. And I was, before I bought this, obviously I couldn't afford a gold Rolex. I'm not sure I would have bought one anyway, because I always thought they were a little bit gaudy. But I remember talking to Alan Jones, it was after the US Grand Prix. It must have been about 1979, I think. And he was saying, "Oh yeah, mate, go buy a gold Rolex." And I said, "Wow, Alan, tell me." I'd never even really heard of Rolex. Didn't really know what it was all about. And he said, "Oh well, put it like this: if you're in the middle of the desert and you haven't got any money at all, and you need to get to the nearest town, you haven't even got a camel, but all you got is a gold Rolex. That's what'll get you there, mate. You just give it to one of the locals and Bob's your uncle. You'll be there." So I thought, that's quite a cool thing. I better get a Rolex. This is the only one I could afford. But yeah, I think it's gone up in value a little bit, I think. But anyway, it's not why I have it, obviously. Anyway, going back to it, your question. Well, yeah. If I was Stroll, I would be talking to Honda. Definitely, because why not? I mean, if Red Bull are kind of focusing on the Ford element, Honda, we know, are as good as they are. A championship winning team, have been for many, many years. And why not? You don't want to be a Mercedes customer team forever. And they're doing well enough now for Honda to say, yeah, let's get with these people. Let's sit down and talk. So I think it's a logical thing for them to do. I mean, the shame in the true sense of the word here, I think, is that Zach Brown burned his boats with Honda by basically sacking them and going to Mercedes, buying Mercedes customer engines, when, as we now know, all it took was to manage the whole Honda program correctly in the way Red Bull have and did, for Honda to produce the best engine in Formula One. And McLaren walked away from that, which I think was a huge mistake. And now, when they should be in a position to be perhaps graduating, if you like, to the number one Honda deal. There's no chance they're going to get it after what happened. So yeah, I think it could go to Aston, and if I was Stroll, that's exactly what I would do. So very good question. Thank you very much, Turbo GSR. I'm very kind of you to do to do one of those. No, I'm not quite, oh, here we go. Going back, trying to get back into normal chat again. Saying no audio. Can't hear you, sir. Audio fine. Can't hear. Oh, all right. It's all right now, is it? Let me just check on my edit platform. Bub, where are we? This one. Hang on. There we go. Yeah, it seems to be working. Volume's going up and down. Testing. 1 2 1 2 1 2. That's another of my mates WhatsApping me. All happening at the moment. Sorry about all this. Trying to do a movie at the moment. Trying to produce a movie. Well, early stages yet. Won't tell you what it's all about, but could be fun if it actually happens. So audio's good. So I'm assuming that's fine. So Turbo GSI says, I feel sprints work best for boring tracks like Monaco, Spain, although I'd rather eliminate sprints altogether. It's interesting you think Spain's a boring track. I quite like Spain. I think Barcelona's going to be a good circuit this year. Now they got rid of that ridiculous chicane before the last corner, that piff-paff thing. It's a proper last corner again, and that's good, I think. And I love turns 2, 3. Well, I love the transition from turn 2, that exit of that right left, and then how you set the car up for the right-hander. It's effectively a long straight because it's flat, and you'd really see that's where you really see somebody like Max or Lewis or Charles at their very best. They just have minimal load in the car as they're going into the right-hander there. I like turn 4, long corner, lots you can do there. Turn 5, downhill hairpin, take it or leave it. But then down the hill to 6, through there, up, and then 9's a great corner, that quick corner, right-hander. I love it. Maybe when you say boring, you mean doesn't produce great motor racing. That's probably what you mean. And I suspect you're right in that sense, because with these cars, it's going to be more difficult on circuits like Barcelona to get near and overtake. So it may well, in terms of overtaking, it probably is boring, but it's not how I judge whether a circuit's boring or not. Monaco, I don't think Monaco's boring either. I mean, going up the hill into Casino Square, it's got to be the least boring part of life, isn't it? When you're braking over the hump there, into the between the guardrail, into the swimming pool, down the hill. I wouldn't call Monaco boring. But anyway, I take your point. Eliminate sprints altogether. I agree with that. So there we are. Thank you those saying audio's good. All good here. Great sound and picture. Well, about great picture. It's a picture of me. That can't be right. But anyway, there you go. Promo 130 says, hi Peter, thanks for making my workday a lot better. Well, anything I can do to help, be happy to. Aaron Lee, when Lewis was asked whether tyre warmers should be taken away, he was quite opposed to it. Does this surprise you, given he's presumably aware that he would be good on cold tyres relative to others? I know what the answer to this question is, but I'm not quite sure how I should frame it. I need to think about how I'm going to do this. If I said to you that we were in a tyre war at the moment and Lewis was not racing on Pirellis but on Michelin's or Bridgestones or something like that, and he was asked that question, I think he'd say, bring it on. Does that answer your question? I think, not to put it too fine a point on it, I think Lewis... We wouldn't say this because, like everybody in Formula One, he's very grateful to Pirelli for the job they do. And a lot of the time, they do a very, very good job. But to do the job they do, they actually, in the minds of some Formula One drivers, I'm not sure the rookies because they don't know any better, but some Formula One drivers, they do the job by producing quite difficult tyres that don't offer a lot of feel to the driver and go off quite quickly just when you don't want them to go off. And Lewis is a purist as a racing driver, in my view. I'm not sure he would describe himself that way, but he is. He's a pure racing driver, and he's a touch and feel driver. And to a touch and feel driver, whether it be Lewis, Ayrton Senna, Nigel Mansell, Jackie Stewart, Tazio Nuvolari, Bernd Rosemeyer, to any of these guys, if you give them a tyre that's quite difficult to touch and feel and just sort of goes off a cliff at some point, they're not going to enjoy that aspect of their art. And I think what Lewis is saying is, it's difficult enough as it is with the tires in temperature. What would it be like without? I think that's what he's saying. I don't think he's saying, oh yeah, I'm going to be better on cold tires than Yuki Tsunoda, because he will be, but to what end? I mean, to him, it's everybody's going to be sliding around with. He for sure. I'm not putting words in Lewis's mouth here, and I don't want to be misquoted. I'm just giving my opinion of what a driver like Lewis or Charles or Max would think about this, and they would only, in the same way that they're all good in the wet, but if you ask them right now, would you like the Grand Prix to be wet or dry? Most of them will say the dry because, they'll all say the dry because it's actually quite difficult to get everything right in the current era in which we are in the wet. So I think that answer. I think hopefully that answers your question. If it was another era, if it was the 90s, for example, I think Lewis would be quite happy to have no tyre warmers. Tails, do you think Mercedes had an unfair advantage because they had people working on their Project One streetcar to improve the engine despite the budget cap? Horror. Yeah, I do. But I think probably Ferrari were not stupid in that area, and probably not anybody else, actually. None of the engine manufacturers. This is what the whole budget cap thing is, to me was always, is and will be ludicrous, because there are so many ways of getting around it. And so many ways in which you don't need to get around it by paying the driver a massive amount of money, for example. So, yeah, of course. Of course they would. And how would you police that? You wouldn't. You can't. Intercept, LOL, nobody getting on board with it. Oh, I'm quite sure about that. Replying to Robin, who said, I don't know what that was. Oh, another one here. Randy Verblier, thank you very much. Here's another super chat. Dear Peter, don't you think if the race on Sunday would have been better, the result of your poll would be very different? When you say pole, P-O-L-E, I think you mean pole, P-O-L-L. You mean the sprint race? Or do you mean... Oh, no, you said the race on Sunday. Not sure. I don't think anybody's... I don't know. We'll see. I don't think anybody disliked the sprint race because it had the same winner, or did they? Is that what they didn't like about it? I think most people just thought it was quite a boring race, which it was. 6 laps behind a safety car and... not many laps of racing, and when they were racing, there wasn't that much racing. A, and B, all that Parc Fermé business, and C, it detracted from the Grand Prix anyway. I think that's my understanding of what most people, Randy, didn't like about it. And so I can't put my head in the head of somebody that would think, oh, well, the sprint race has to be won by somebody else. Why would I think that? Because the fastest guys qualified on the front row for the sprint race, and the fastest guys qualified on the front row for the Grand Prix, and they both finished top 3 in both races, which is logical, isn't it? What are we saying? That if the sprint race was a reverse grid or something, people would like it more? I don't think they would. I think that would be even more contrived, wouldn't it? Anyway, I'm not perhaps doing a great answer to your question, Randy, particularly as it's a super chat, but I can't think of anything else to say, really. Sorry about that. Hey Peter, this is Scipio Nation. Hey Peter, I'll be at the Formula One exhibition on Sunday. Great, in Madrid. Can't wait. Your videos about it inspired me to go. Will you be there? Do I have a chance to meet you? Well, I won't be on Sunday, no, because I'll be working. I'll be working on the Miami Grand Prix, not in Miami, but I'll be working in studio. So, unfortunately, not. But Scipio, please have a great time and enjoy. What can I say? I don't know exactly what your forte is in terms of Formula One, but if it's design and technology, I think you'll love it. If it's the great drivers of the past and the great duels, I think you'll love it. If it's the history of Formula One as a business over the years, how it's evolved, particularly television-wise, I think you'll love it. And if you just like sniffing the air and getting a feel of what Formula One's been all about and will be all about, then I think you'll love the last haul, the immersive experience in the last haul as well. And I hope you leave thinking, yeah, I really enjoyed that. So thank you very much, A, for going, and thank you for your message. Appreciate it. Hikaru Official. I think we got some more Super chats coming in. Hikaru official South African fan club. Wow. Turbo GSR sprint won't work at Monaco as there aren't pit stops in a sprint, and Monaco needs pit stops. Well, yeah, I think it's a very good point. Maybe the what at Turbo was suggesting was that because Monaco's a boring race, at least there's only going to be 17 laps of it in the sprint, and you go down to Stars and Bars and have a drink afterwards rather than, sit through 2 hours of it. Maybe that's what he was thinking. I'm only putting words in his mouth. But Thomas, will anyone but Red Bull win this year? Well, yeah, Thomas, that's what I'm sure. If you bumped into Toto Wolff in the street, or Freddie Vasseur, or indeed Lawrence Stroll, and you asked all three of them, they'd say, not if we got anything to say about it. So they're all trying very hard to win Grand Prix. I think they will. I mean, one of those three. I mean, Ferrari were not that far away. I mean, okay, they're on the pole both races. Yeah, they got blitzed in the race, but, things can happen. And Charles is obviously gelling nicely with Freddie Vasseur. As I predicted, that is the new combination at Ferrari that will make the big difference, because Frederick is good enough at his job and good enough in terms of being a racer to understand that the heart of Ferrari right now is getting Charles Leclerc balanced and quick again, in which he's doing very well. Jock Clear in there as well. And that's a very good thing for the sport, and there's a very good chance as a result that, given a few variables, I keep talking about these variables, we need to interview them at some point, see what they think about it all. There's half a chance Ferrari will win a race, and Aston, I don't know, Fernando could get a dramatic pole at Monaco, couldn't he? And if he does that, he could win the Grand Prix. And so could Lewis, so could George. I think Mercedes will win a race or two. I think Ferrari will win 2 or 3 races, and I think Aston might win a race. So I think, I don't think you should be too worried about it at the moment. Well, you may not be worried. Red Bull fans aren't worried, are they? Nicholas Beaumont. Hi, Peter. As a fan of the modern era of Formula One, it's always fantastic to hear tangential stories of your time in Formula One. Yeah, well, hopefully my current time in Formula One as well. Still have quite a lot of links with various drivers and teams and people. But yeah, I think I've said a few times, Nigel Roebuck and I, Robin Miller, sadly passed away now, but a lovely journalist in America, always agreed with us that, we were lucky to be in the era we were as journalists, as young journalists, because it wasn't a big deal to sit down with Mario or Jackie Ickx or Clay Regazzoni or Jackie Stewart or Ayrton Senna or Alan Prost and have dinner with them and chat. And more difficult to do that today, I think, for the younger generation. Turbo GSR. I have to go back now and see if I'm. Oh yeah. Turbo GSR, thank you very much. Another super chat. Is McLaren forever stuck where they are? Is their new wind tunnel a game changer or lipstick on a pig? Also, similar question regarding Renault. Turbo GSR. Well, McLaren have made a little bit of an improvement, I think, since Melbourne, and they didn't look too bad in Baku. Not too bad. I mean, they're not in Aston Martin class, but we are actually going to go into a little bit more detail of what they've been doing with the car on the Friday video from Miami with Shub. So watch this space for that, and you'll see that they are starting to do some stuff. And will their new wind tunnel be a game changer? In the sense that it'll be the first tunnel, probably be the last tunnel as well, to be built post-porpoising, and that they've taken the porpoising issue into account with the mount they have in the tunnel. Maybe it is a game changer. Maybe it'll be a more accurate tunnel than Mercedes or Ferrari have right now. I doubt it'll be anything better than Adrian Newey's tunnel, but I think it'll be somewhere near, probably better than Ferrari or Mercedes. So in that sense, if they don't get a decent result out of that come September, then they really don't know what they're doing. And I think there's some good new people there. As I said, I mentioned Piers Thin now is got quite an elevated position at McLaren. And I think I've got a lot of time for Piers, partly because of his dad, Sheridan, but also because Piers is a racer. Anybody that did as much hill climbing as he did at Prescott loves motor racing, and that's a good thing. can always judge people by their hill climbing, I think. Willem Toet, good example. Similar question regarding Renault. Well, that's a more complex question, I think. Very political, very French in the way they operate, but there are still enough good ex-Tollman people there, I think, Tollman lineage anyway, for us to be reasonably confident that they'll do half a reasonable job. But I worry about nothing against the French, and I'm a massive fan of Renault and Ligier over the years and everything they've done in motorsport, particularly in Formula One. But they do it their way, and I'm not convinced that it's as easy for somebody like Otmar to go in there and create a relatively straightforward path in the way that I imagine Freddie Vasseur is at Ferrari, because it's a pretty powerful setup there in terms of the way they think and the way they want to operate. And I just can't imagine the chemistry between Ocon and Gasly is great, and I can't imagine that's to the benefit of the team either. So yeah, I don't know. I do. A lot of people seem to be negative about Otmar. I think he's a good guy, actually, and I think he is responsible for the Red Bull hires that went to Aston Martin, and then he left Aston. So I think he's quite capable of bringing some more good people to Alpine if that's the way to go, and to try and get through the politics there and to make it all stick. But if you had to say which team will be looking better by sort of 2/3 of the way through the year, I'd say probably McLaren, I would guess. Don't know. Well, I do know. I don't know, but that's what I'm guessing. It makes sense. So where are we going? Wow, so many questions coming in. There's another one here. Angus Burston, this is a super chat. Hi Peter, off topic. Do you think Kimi would have done well in 2019-21 Red Bull, seeing he's comfortable in a car that oversteers like his McLaren Merc days? I think he would have been comfortable in that car, and I think he would have been very quick in it, definitely, absolutely. I don't think he would have been anything like as quick as Max. I think he would have been Daniel Ricciardo quick, or Sergio Perez quick. Maybe not quite as quick as Sergio. I think Kimi, as I've said this before, I think Kimi went off the boil a bit towards the back end of his McLaren career, and he was off the boil a little bit more at Ferrari. I know he won the championship, but it was a lot of momentum there still, and he was still incredibly good, but he wasn't quite the pinhead sharp Kimi that he'd been at his absolute peak at McLaren. And so I think it would have just been the same. I mean, I think in a very good car, Kimi, even at the back end of his career, was always going to be pretty quick. But he did have weird things going on, didn't he, when he was sort of sliding down a bit at Ferrari, and he had these odd spins out of slow corners and, weird things that Kimi would never have done at the McLaren. And I think a lot of that was Kimi himself, his physiology and his approach to life, and not staying perhaps quite as fit as he should have been. I know he had Mark Arnold with him, who's one of the best trainers out there, but Kimi is Kimi, and he'll always do what he does. He's a law unto himself. So I think he would have been good, but I don't think it would have been the Kimi that you saw at McLaren. And I don't, does he like a car that oversteer? What he's saying is, I don't want a car that understeers, thank you very much. I want a front end. As long as I've got a front end, I'll deal with the rest of it. And Kimi at his peak was one of these drivers that you knew would stay flat on the throttle through a 175 mile an hour blind right-hander with a crosswind gap in the middle of the corner, and he'd just stay flat on the throttle knowing that he could handle the moment when it occurred. And not many drivers, I think, fell into that category. So that's, in that sense, he always preferred oversteer, but I don't think that was a factor of, or is a factor of, his performance drop-off. I think it was more himself. I hope that answers the question. Somebody, I've just caught my eye here. Surprised you think, where's it gone? Surprised you think more possible wins for Merc than Aston Martin, considering the latter have been decisively quicker in 3 to 4 races. Yeah, I think I suppose what I really think there, that's from IGM01. I'm jumping around a bit here, but it's a good question. The reason I think that is because I think Mercedes have more organic development growth that we'll be seeing in the next 2 to 3 months. And I think that Aston Martin have got a pretty good car right now, and I'm not sure they will develop it a lot more than it is. And you could argue, to be really blunt, and if they're going to win a Grand Prix, they would have done it by now, sort of. I'm not saying that for sure, because I think they could win still. I still think they could win a race, and probably will win a race. But I think Mercedes have got more cumulative development potential for the next 7 months than Aston Martin, purely because they've got more building blocks on which to operate, and they're a very, very well organised team. I think Aston Martin are still relatively young in terms of their new structure and how they go, and they're switching from an Andy Green car to next year's car, so that's a big change as well. And a lot going on at Aston, but a lot going on at Mercedes as well, and the new factory, of course, at Aston. So I just think Mercedes potentially are going to be, I've got more sort of growth down the road. Hope that makes sense. So that was Turbo GSR. So I'm going back up above that now because I had to get to him, because that was a okay, where are we? Sorry, I'm just filtering through the questions now. Seems to be a lot. Wow. Equal machinery. I'm going to jump a bit. Sorry, mate. Sorry, mates. Enthusiast friends. Sorry, I'm just going to get to where I was. Well, I've gone to the top and I haven't seen any of these questions, so I presume that's where I should be restarting again. Mason Harper, force everyone to do 2 stops and Monaco will be better. Well, there's more special effects for you. I don't know. Difficult, isn't it? Because then what happens if you've got real reasons to stop? And then what about the penalties? I don't know. I don't think that would work, would it? I mean, you're probably not being serious anyway, but yeah. Turbo GSR, Spain watching a car on the circuit is fun, but the passing is boring. That being said, passing doesn't equal fun to watch a la NASCAR. So yeah, that's how you basically agree. I mean, it is an interesting circuit, Barcelona, I think. Optifen replying, it's in Dutch, I think, so yeah, can't really do much about that. Who's the best driver now? Farhead08 Q8 asks. Well, be difficult. Best driver now. Well, Max Verstappen rolls off the tongue, but he just got beaten twice by Sergio Perez, didn't he, in Baku? Sergio Perez. I don't know. Charles Leclerc 2 poles in what was obviously not a great car. Not bad. I've always said Max, Charles and Lewis are the best 3 drivers we have at the moment. Very different drivers, very different stages of their careers, different build-ups to where they got to. I don't think you could. I don't want to get involved in that. The best driver right now would be one of those 3. I think Lewis in his. I think we saw in Baku, particularly at the restart of the sprint, or was it the Grand Prix? No, the Grand Prix. It was it was the sprint, wasn't it? He kind of backed away a bit, and he didn't want to get involved, and that was fair enough. And he enjoyed his race wherever he was in the Grand Prix on Sunday. He wasn't up there fighting for the lead, but he was still hard, tough racer and wanting more power, give me more power, and not getting bored with it all. So that says a lot about Lewis, I think, as a racer and as an individual. Charles Leclerc, fabulous. Look how quick he was at the end of the race. I mean, if he'd used that pace throughout, he would have probably stopped for 3 sets of tyres, but he was really quick at the end. He was on the pole twice. Pretty impressive. And Max, Max got beaten in Baku because of his inferior technique on traction corners when there are long straights afterwards to reward perfect traction. And that's how he got beaten. So that's an area where he needs to improve, as I've been saying for 12 months since Monaco last year. And I always said it was going to be interesting by the time we got to Baku to see if he was a different driver in that respect, and he hasn't improved. I think there's going to be a question about that, and I might as well give my thoughts on that, which is that I think it's the Sebastian Vettel syndrome. When the writing was on the wall at Red Bull that he wasn't doing as good a job as Daniel Ricciardo, he just left and went to Ferrari and didn't work on the areas where he felt where perhaps he needed to, if he'd really looked deeply, and just assumed that going to Ferrari as a 4 times world champion because he can do no wrong would result in 4 more world championships, and it didn't happen. Same way Fernando at McLaren in 07, assumed that McLaren were favouring Lewis because Lewis was better in a couple of areas out of the box. But it was because Lewis was actually better in a couple of areas out of the box. And I think it's the same with Max. I think Max probably thinks now, there's no way I can be learning anything from Sergio Perez. And if he wanted to, and if he really got down to it, I'm sure he could improve. He's got enough talent and enough ability to be self-critical to do that. But I think the way Formula One is now, it's just like, oh, Max, wait for the next race. It'll be different. And I probably won't change. If it hasn't changed between Monaco and Baku this year, it ain't going to change before Monaco this year, is it? Or Singapore, probably. Another live chat coming in, I think, from... one's coming in. I can't find... Here we go. No, it isn't. Okay. It's all a bit confusing how they keep... Oh, no, there it is. Andre Gant. Thank you very much, Andre. Does Charles Leclerc spank Max in equal machinery? Does Charles Leclerc? No, nobody spanks Max in equal machinery. Max is really good. I mean, I think we're supposed to say now, what sort of circuit are they going to be on? Are they going to be on a Perez circuit or not? Only because he's got this unique talent, Perez, on those sorts of corner. And they don't appear that often, those sorts of corners, with the straights to reward them. But and other drivers do other things very well. But overall, over a season, there's no way Charles would spank Max. But he'd be with him, absolutely. Maybe a fraction ahead in qualifying, 60% of the time. But it'd be very, very close. And I think during the race, maybe Max still has the advantage in terms of just coping with whatever is thrown at him and making it happen, whereas Charles, whose history is a little bit more frenetic, will not be quite as agile with all the things that potentially are in his grasp to handle the situation. So Max, because he's grown up effectively as an Adrian Newey driver, is a very calm performer under stress, whereas I think Charles, because of what's happened, is slightly less calm. Lewis too, I think, is probably very, very good, very like Max in that respect. But Charles probably a bit more emotional when things aren't going quite right. And over a year, I think that would probably give the nod to Max. Andrew King says, pit stops during red flags is one of the biggest jokes of Formula One as a newer fan. During red flags, you mean changing the car during the red flag period? I think is probably what you mean, which all arose at Monaco a few years ago, didn't they? When there was a big debate about whether you could run new tyres or not at the restart. And they've said that you can. And I think it's a very difficult one because the problem with a red flag is that some of the cars will be damaged, and then somebody says, oh yeah, I've got a damaged front wing and we need to change the left front tyre because that might be damaged too, and they get a new set, and then the others don't, so they just we'll just let everybody change tyres. And I think if that's what you mean, perhaps you mean behind the safety car, I don't know, but that's where the red flag thing came from, and it's difficult to know where to go with that in terms of how to how to make it better. So we've got more super chats. Hi Peter, another question. Angus Burston, do you think Max is against sprint race weekends due to it being harder to set up a car with a strong front end in practice? No, I think if Max is against sprint weekends, I think it's because he just likes the Grand Prix and just wants to do a proper Grand Prix, like all of us. You know, he wants to be on the pole and wants to win the Grand Prix. He doesn't want to be thinking of some other thing, a sprint race in between. I think it's as simple as that. I think is purist the right word there? Probably not, but I think I've always said one of Max's great qualities is that he simplifies his racing down to the really important core elements, as did Nigel Mansell very, very effectively. And that's where the similarity between Nigel and Max lies, apart from their driving style. And I think it's that. And I think a sprint is a complication, isn't it? It's a complication to what is the weekend. And if he was probably sitting down over dinner about it, he'd probably think, well, you know, if they want to do that, we'll do a sprint race somewhere else. We'll do it in Formula 2 cars or something, but don't mess up the Grand Prix weekend. That's probably the sort of thing he would say. You know, maybe not that, but I think that would be the essence of his main problem with it. Yeah? Anne-Marie Kunish says, I think Alonso's not far from them. We're talking about Charles and Max. Yeah, absolutely. You know, Fernando's right there. I thought it was quite funny, actually, in the race. Bring the mic a little bit nearer. That quite often now, not only in Baku, but in Melbourne too, we've seen Fernando come out with radio messages in which he's being seen to be a really good buddy of Lance Stroll and helping him along with brake balance and Lance this, and, you know, just generally putting his arm around Lance. And you can just see what's going on there. It's Fernando trying to be best mates with the Strolls and Lawrence, and isn't he a great guy? And just this is his future. This is where the money is. This is a team with enormous potential, and Fernando being Mr. Nice Guy. I mean, where was the Fernando when Felipe Massa was leading the German Grand Prix and was told to finish second behind Fernando? I didn't hear Fernando then saying, no, let Felipe win. He's such a great guy. He's done so much work at Ferrari. He deserves it. I can see Fernando, you know, he's a funny guy. He's a good guy. You can read him a mile off what he's doing and what he's thinking right now. The Strolls, this is the future. I must look after Lance. This is the guy that took him out of the US Grand Prix last year, for Pete's sake, on the straight. Dear Fernando. Dan Lowe, Maximus, that is the worst take I've heard. I don't know what that is. Don't know what that's on about, sorry. Goat Milton Ham, Lewis Hamilton. Oh, okay. Greatest of all time, Lewis Hamilton. Yeah. I mean, greatest. Do you really think he was that much better than Rudy Caracciola? Please advise. Miguel Morayed, 16. Peter, you have a lot of knowledge, but you're quite biased towards Red Bull. Am I? Well, maybe. I don't think. But what do you mean by bias? I mean, obviously, I think Adrian Newey is the best design engineer in Formula One, probably Formula One history. I think the Red Bull RB19 is the best race car right now by a mile. I think the Red Bull race team, in terms of the way they think about racing on the ground, strategy, pit work, general approach to all the things that can go wrong on a race day, is as good as any out there, if not the best. So and I think they've got one of the best three drivers in the world in their car, and I think they've got the best wingman in the other car on the planet. Does that make me biased? It just makes me logical, I think. I mean, it's up to you. If you think that's biased, then that's fine. But I'm just doing it based on pure knowledge. Pure logic. So there you go. I think, I mean, the whole bias comes down to this whole business of the polarization of Formula One due to social media. That if you rate Lewis Hamilton, you're not allowed to rate Max Verstappen. If you rate Ferrari, you're not allowed to rate Aston Martin. I'm sorry, I'm not one of those guys. I just look at everything, and some things I think are brilliant. Others I think, well, that's a load of old rubbish, and that's just me. I don't really care about, you know. What's it care? I'm not in terms of bias. I just don't think I'm biased. That's all I can say. Sorry. Arthur, despite Russell beating him. Oh, what's this? I think this is a reply to, is Lewis Hamilton the greatest of all time? Says, well, Russell beat him on points last year. Yeah, but, you know, midfield, car, young lion in the car. no real surprise. Did Jackie Stewart upstaging Graham Hill in 65 diminish Graham Hill's stature as a driver? I don't think it did. In fact, he went on to win the World Championship in 69, didn't he? In 68. So, and be very quick in 69. So, yeah, I mean, what Lewis did last year, it's actually amazing, I think, considering, it was a long time since he's been in the midfield car and he had to sort of get his elbows dirty in every first corner of every first lap. Amazing, really. Big Dave, I'm a Ferrari fan, but do you think a team that functions in the modern era will rescue Charles one day? So you don't think Ferrari functions in the modern era? I think give Freddie Vasseur a bit of a break here, because I think you'll see already he's starting to get a much better performance out of Charles, and I think Ferrari are heading in the right direction. Give them a break. I think they're doing all right. But of course, if Charles on the market, who isn't going to bid for him? I don't think Red Bull will, because they wouldn't want him alongside Max, but I think Mercedes would, if Lewis's position's a little bit unclear about the future, as would I don't think Aston would, because Fernando and Lawrence are such good friends, but everybody else would. Not that Charles would want to drive for anybody else. So Charles not going to leave Ferrari, is he? Unless he can drive a Mercedes, a Red Bull, or a Mercedes or a Red Bull, I think would be the answer. Car 1595. How long before we start seeing midweek races? I feel like we're heading that way, as the current owners seem to have a more is always better approach. Well, yeah, the current owners of the sport, I think, in order to keep the finances ticking over and for all the bricks in the wall of the business model that Bernie Ecclestone built, not to sort of allow the wall to come crumbling down, the way to get the money in absolutely surefire is to have the racers put up the money, RACES, and that justifies, and then you got an income, you got a regular income. The more races you have, the more regular income you have. And there's a point where the teams can't do more than 23 races or whatever it is. But actually, we didn't see a lot of laps in the build-up to the Grand Prix in Baku, did we? With the sprint race and FP1 only. So and the fans, if you actually quantify it in terms of the number of times a fan sees his driver in the car that he wants to see going around in front of him, the fan actually isn't getting as much value for money now as he did 20 years ago. But racing's very different, and the whole business is very different. But in the absence of money pouring out of the sky into the sport, as it used to from tobacco companies, this is the only way to guarantee that sort of money again. It's to put on lots of races and to magnify the television viewership, providing in itself that brings in new viewers. I mean, the whole Netflix thing is brilliant for the sport, but I suspect behind the scenes the bean counters are thinking, and let's hope that 85% of the people watching all the Netflix stuff then pay to watch Formula One on paid television. That's the holy grail, isn't it? Getting that to happen. Angus Burston, there's another super chat here. Pete, you don't have to answer this. Who do you think is the better driver, Lewis or Alonso? I think overall Lewis, and I think because he's everything, he's good at everything he does. I think he's a better qualifier than Alonso, and he's quicker over one lap. And I think he's a more balanced. What's the right word? I don't think he fragments a team in the way that Alonso does when things aren't going his way. I don't think you can accuse Lewis of doing that. And I think Lewis is... I think Lewis knows exactly what he needs in order to be quick. And I'm not sure Fernando to that extent. I think Fernando's so good at driving an inferior car that sometimes he's probably not as good as Lewis of knowing what it is he needs to do in order to take the next step to be super, super quick with that car. And I think that's a talent that Lewis has. Maybe Fernando doesn't. A little bit like Jochen Rindt wasn't the greatest test driver because he kept adapting to all the foibles of the car, a bit like Ronnie Peterson. And whereas an Andretti would wouldn't drive a car on the limit unless it was more or less where he wanted it to be. And I think, I'm not saying Lewis doesn't drive a car on the limit, any car on the limit, but I think he knows where to go with the car. And I think he's got a slightly more simple approach to racing as well. He's not quite as political as Fernando, not quite as emotional as Fernando. And then there's another one here, which is Harris Neto. Hi, Peter. What is Oscar Piastri's driving style and what is his career potential? I think from what I've seen now, I think he's got short corners. I think he's got a lovely touch. I think he drives really, really well. And I think he's got enormous potential. I think, in a Red Bull right now, he'd be really quick. I think in a Ferrari, he'd be not far away from Sainz out of the box. I think he's, I don't think he's, obviously it's very early days. Obviously he's not as quick as George or Lewis or Charles or Max. But I think he's potentially right up there. And this is the problem for Lando. I think, I'm not saying that Lando's not as quick, if not quicker. I think Lando's got enormous potential as well, but he's in danger at the moment of going sideways in terms of his career at McLaren. And Piastri has got nothing to lose at McLaren. He can only gain by looking good alongside Lando. And this is an important year for Lando because he needs to come out of it basically being 3/10 to 5/10 quicker than Piastri everywhere and blowing him away. And that's not happening yet. It may happen from Miami onwards, but it's not happening. And if it's not happening, Lando needs to be in another team getting his career going with some sort of skyrocket, because Piastri's eating into Lando's stock right now, I think. And I predicted that would happen. And it's because Lando's got to start focusing on what Piastri's doing, because he is quick and he does know what he's doing with a racing car. And I'm not saying that Daniel wasn't quick at some point and didn't know what he was doing in the racing car, but it wasn't difficult for Lando basically to do Daniel. It's much more difficult for him to do Piastri. And that will have an effect, because there'll be moments when Lando might say, yeah, but what's Piastri doing? Or the engineer's saying to Lando, irritatingly, well, Oscar's doing this, which Lando doesn't want to hear, probably. So all that's coming in, and none of that's a help to Lando. I always said, a great shame. I think Ricciardo was a great team, and this is a less balanced team now, but he's a faster driver for sure, Piastri. So he's good. He's really good. Right, back to where we are. So Ferrari, how long before we midweek races? Okay. Dwayne Warren, Red Bull blew the budget and cheated. Was it worth it now that they're that far in front? Well, you could say, I think, that they benefited last year and they're benefiting now because they cheated. I don't see it that way. I think they might have benefited. I don't think they did. I think they pushed all the dimensions of the budget cap as hard as they could, as all the teams were. And they exceeded it in a couple of areas. The amount by which they exceeded it wasn't significant to the overall development of the car. It was the concept of the car that won them the championship, not some $3 million detail on the car. First point. And secondly, I think that they had a very tough winter. I think they felt the effect of the winning the championship, having the least amount of testing, and of the penalties that were imposed on them. And they still managed to produce this car, despite all that, because they'd already produced a great car. And so this car was a logical development step ahead. And they could do that within the confines of the relatively restricted testing and budget cap that they had. I don't think, in other words, that this car is a great car because it's born of the cheating in 2021. That's what I think. And call me biased, but I think Adrian Newey is that good. And I think what they've done, I think what you're seeing with this year's car is basically a lightweight, on the limit, weight limit version of last year's car, the second half of last year, which wasn't on the weight limit. It actually put on weight just to ensure reliability, and they didn't want to do any more development on that car. They just wanted to finish the season, finish as many races as they could, and by the law of averages, win races. And then over the winter, they basically just took weight off that car, and this is what this car is. Obviously, building new bits around the new regulations. So really good planning, you could say, and born of having the right car at the beginning of 2021, unlike everybody else. That was where Red Bull were just so much better. Call me biased. Johnny Dixon. The tyres were terrible in Baku. Mediums lasted about 12 laps and the hards looked like they could do a whole race. There shouldn't be a big gap like that. Yeah, well, you're saying it, not me, because I try to be as nice to about Pirelli as I can. Because, and the reason I'm like that is because without Pirelli, we'd be in trouble. Who would be doing the tyres in Formula One? They spend a fortune on marketing, production, logistics, and a little bit on technology. And Formula One has come up with a basic plan of how to make life as easy as possible for Pirelli by having these enforced pit stops and having to run 2 compounds. Because if it didn't do that, and it was just like, is there a tyre that can do the full Grand Prix distance? The technology budget would just skyrocket from Pirelli's point of view. So because I like Formula One and because I'm very pleased that Pirelli are a part of Formula One, and they go back, if you want to argue the case for Pirelli, they go back to the turn of the century, 19th century that is, 20th century. And, they've got tremendous heritage. Look at pictures of Nuvolari and Enzo Ferrari. They've got Pirelli logos on them. So they're good company to have. But the only way we can really have them is by making life as easy as possible for them. And yeah, of course, the tyres are not fun on which to race. And if you had dinner with most of the drivers away from all the media and away from prying eyes, they'd all say the same thing. Tyres are really difficult. And but that's, what do you want? What do you want? Everyone to be on rock hard Avon tyres or something? Forget that. MYR30, another super chat. Thank you very much. Hope I'm able to come back to where I was. Hi Peter, thank you and appreciate all the insight. I asked this for all Seb fans. Please take it lighthearted. Do you have any animosity with Seb? Have you talked to him in person? Are we talking Sebastian Vettel, I think we're talking about? No, I don't have any animosity with him at all. I have spoken to him a lot and I've always got on very well with him. I have to say, I changed my opinion of Seb after that business at Baku of running into Lewis behind the safety car because he was so annoyed at how slowly Lewis was driving behind the safety car when Lewis was entitled to go as slowly as he wanted to go. And he just drove into him. And I just thought, that is really bad as a world champion to be doing that in front of a public audience. It was a terrible example. So that did change my opinion of him, I guess, over the years. But equally, I don't have any other problems with him. And I know he's got a lot of respect for the sport. And I know he cares a lot about things outside Formula One now, which I totally respect as well. And I think I was actually a big proponent of Seb's early on in his career as well, partly because of his unique style, that sort of, V cornering, which he did better than anybody else, combined with an astonishing talent for car control and judgment and all the things that all great Grand Prix drivers have. But he condensed it all into this V thing, which I thought was fascinating, and he never changed, and good. So yeah, I mean, that's it. I don't have anything against Seb, but I don't think he'd be doing the same job in the car that, well, it's a good point, isn't it? If he was in the Aston Martin right now, would he be as quick as Fernando? I think he probably would, actually. I think he'd be right there. I think he'd be right there in this car, this Aston, because it's got grip where he needs it. It's got a good back end. He can do what he wants mid-corner, and I think he would be really quick. So, yeah, my only thing with Seb was that business of the safety car. I wasn't a Dan Ticktum fan either, the way he conducted himself once he got going again. But I mean, if you look at what happened to him when he did a similar thing, I think at Thruxton, a Formula, Renault race or something, and he hit another competitor behind the safety car, he got banned for a year. Young kid. And Seb got off pretty lightly from that. I mean, that's not his fault because, you can blame the stewarding or whatever. But I just always thought, that was a very very inelegant thing to do. So there we go. Okay, next question. Andrew King. I started watching Formula One in 2020, but stayed triggered. Lots of laughs. Not British either. Good. All right. Well, that's good to know, Andrew. I started, yeah, there you go. Said that twice, but got it through twice, Andrew. No problem there. Rachel Colks. I don't understand why less practice is better. Wouldn't we rather enjoy athletes perform at their best? You don't keep other sport athletes on ice and let them hone their craft an hour before a game. Absolutely right, Rachel. And that comes back to my, let's go back to Thursday practice, let alone Friday, and have them finding perfection. And you're absolutely right. This business of, it is special effects, give them a little bit of running and then just throw them in there and see who qualifies and how they qualify. All of that kind of would be okay if it was a human sport, but it's not. It's a technical sport, and some teams can get it right and some couldn't. And that was the problem, I think. And it's not only, as I say, it goes back to last year. If you're a Red Bull fan, you lost the Brazilian Grand Prix because of the sprint race. Simple as that. And Baku, Mercedes for sure didn't get the best. I don't think Alpine did, as we saw. Mind you, they were so far back and they had so many issues that they might as well take the gamble and do a bit of testing and change everything. It didn't make any difference, did it? But it was a bit of a farce to have teams actually saying in press releases, we're going to take a grid hit, we're going to start from the pit lane because we want to do a setup change on the car. I mean, it doesn't look good in print, really, does it? It's a bit silly. And I don't think that's the way to go. Turbo GSR, it's only a matter of time before Leclerc starts looking elsewhere if Ferrari can't build a championship-winning car and team. If so, where can he go? Well, yeah, we answered. I mean, I don't think he would go anywhere other than, obviously, Red Bull, if they would have him. But as long as Max is there, I just don't think they would hire him. I don't think, and then it would be Mercedes or possibly Aston, possibly. But I don't know. I think he'd stay at Ferrari. If it was Aston or Ferrari, I think he'd probably stay at Ferrari. If it was Mercedes, for sure, he'd go there like a shot. How go the rookies so far this season, says Joe. The rookies are Logan and not Nick DeBris, is he? Because he raced at Monza last year. So who else is there? It's just Logan, isn't it? Or not? Am I wrong? Anyway, I think Logan's doing a better job than Nicholas Latifi. He's pretty good, actually, isn't he? He's always quick on the straight. Mind you, Latifi was as well. He's starting to hit a few walls, but it'd be interesting to see how he comes out of this, because now he's got Miami, American, first race in America for an American. In how long? Wow, that's a good one. Is it Scott Speed? Probably. Showing my age here, I can't remember. So, yeah. Miami got plenty of walls to hit. If Logan can get through the Miami weekend without hitting a wall, it'd be good. And I think he's been surprisingly quick and good. I don't think I'm missing anybody, am I, in terms of other rookies? I don't think so. Anyway, yeah, I think he's doing all right. Stop. Hammer time. Charles, Alonso and Lewis all matched lap times for a lot of laps. They did. What about Lewis? Kind of in the DRS. I think away from DRS, Charles and Alonso had the edge. Sectors 1 and 2 was the way I saw it. And I think Lewis could get in there with DRS, but not quite as, certainly harder on tyres, from what I could see, the Mercedes. But Charles was impressive, I thought, in Sector 1 particularly, sort of 5 laps from the end of the race. Amazing. And would you say, oh, well, then Red Bulls must have been 3 seconds off the pace, but they weren't. They were quick. They were quick enough for Max to have moments and for Checo to have moments. They were not that far away from where, somewhere near the limit. Raf Rouche, lots of Eldwain with that overspent money. Yeah, okay, there a bit of in-house laughing going on here. Andrew King, Max fans and Lewis fans are much more similar than either side wants to believe. Always makes me laugh. Well, yeah, and let's hope that they all get together and have one big jamboree at the end of the year. Why not? Madeline Popper. I don't know. I don't understand all that. But anyway, when you're all chatting amongst yourself, that's fine. But I don't really understand it all because I'm a bit, because I'm coming in from a third-party position, if you see what I mean. 27 Legend. Do you know why Lewis was so fast on the straights in Brazil 2021? Well, Red Bull was slow on the straights because they ran as much flap as they could because of the horrendous tyre thing they had, because of the poor ride height judgment call they'd made before the race, before the weekend, which they got locked into with the sprint thing, and they realised then too late. So I think it was more Red Bull was slow, and Mercedes were good out of the last corner, very good out of the last corner. They just had a really well balanced car. They were using the tyres really well, got the tyres into the optimum temperature zone in terms of the downforce that car was producing, and they managed obviously to get the right wing setting prior to the sprint. And I think to be fast on the straight in Brazil, you've got to be very good out of that last corner. It's a good circuit like that. If you're not good there, you're in trouble. Down the hill, down the back straight, it's a bit DRS-y there and a bit downhill. So it's that main straight that's the big one. And I think it was more a function of how good they got the tyres in the zone that weekend. Stefan S says they should run go-karts at Monaco. Well, that would be good, wouldn't it? That would be mega. I've always felt going to Monaco that the Formula Renault cars are the best looking cars for Monaco. They look right. They're in proportion to the size of the circuit. I'd love to drive a Formula Renault around Monaco. But have I driven? I've driven what have I driven around Monaco? I've never driven a single seater. I've driven a Renault turbo thing, Renault 5 turbo thing. It was quite fun. Turbo GSS, I like free practice a lot. Wish they would just leave FP1 through FP3 alone and drop this sprint stuff. Well, yeah, I agree with you 100%. I love free practice too. And I love the idea that the teams are all doing all these, back-to-backs and trying new bits and all that's happening, and they're not all having to condense everything down to 5 minutes. As I say, technology is a key part of Formula One's DNA. And if we start putting too many special effects into Formula One, what price the technology? I mean, we've got this technology. It's unbelievably expensive. It is part of Formula One's selling package. It's one of its assets. And yet we don't do much to protect it, preserve it, or show it off to the public. And that's not, I just don't get that. I just don't get it. Andrew King, I'm an F1 fan just like you. Well, that's good. Legend, I know. Andrew, yeah. Well, lots of chat going on there. Talking about Charles, I think he did seem to improve near the end of the Grand Prix, or maybe Lewis you're talking about. Rookies, Mr. Windsor, Steiger, Mr. Seriga. Mr. Windsor, what do you think? Call me Peter, please. Peter, what do you think in store between Honda's HPD and Red Bull or Scuderia AlphaTauri and powertrain matter, given that Ford has engaged with them, and will they have other customer teams? Well, I think Red Bull will continue with basically what they're doing, and it'll be branded Ford, and they've done a very good job with the contract to be able to do that. So you may well find that there may be a touch of Honda essence in the 26 Ford Red Bull engine. Probably not, but certainly the infrastructure will be based around where they are now. And I think, as I said earlier, to me, if Honda are prepared to come in to do a powertrain for 26, the logical team would be Aston Martin. So watch this space on that one, I guess. Camino cloning operations. Which classic circuit would you love to see Formula One return to? Anywhere in the world. Wow. Watkins Glen. Sepang. Actually, to be realistic, I'd say Sepang. If you call that a classic circuit. I don't know what you mean by classic circuit. Do you mean ones that don't even exist anymore, like the old Nürburgring, or, well, it exists, but not as a, proper racetrack. Or Rouen, or Reims, or I don't know, lots of other places. Mossport, Saint-Gervais, Canada. There's a racetrack. But if you really want a sort of half logical question, serious answer, I would say Sepang. I love Sepang. I think it's a great circuit. It was Tilke's first circuit, 1997, I think. They cut ground there, something like that. And it is a great track still. Lovely corners, great for everything. Very hot and sweaty. That's about the only thing. But it's near the airport, so there are lots of nice airport hotels with AC there. It's not a big deal. So I'd see Sepang. Madane Popa says, I've been watching since 1996, so clearly not like me. DB Cooper F1, did you hear about Danny Rick's first time in Red Bull Sim since his return? Everyone was shocked at how he's regressed. I thought you were going to say the usual thing. Everyone was shocked at how good he was. He's shocked at how he's regressed. I didn't hear about that. I think it's hilarious. And I'm pleased that the news has got out if it is true. And it says quite a lot about Danny Rick, doesn't it? Because I think all great racing drivers should be useless in sim, shouldn't they? Because it's all about touch and feel. And if you're a sim driver, it's too mathematic and hand-eye. So yeah, let's hear it for Danny Rick being useless in the sim. Mega. Perez still hasn't beaten Max without some sort of luck. Doesn't mean he hasn't deserved it on merit. Yeah, I'm not sure he was he lucky in the race? I think you could say, I said in my video, I'm not convinced that he wouldn't have won that race had there been no safety car. I think he was starting to put serious pressure on Max to the point where Max was going to have to come in for tyres earlier, and he was going to get the jump on him in the pit stops. Max was starting to lose grip, whereas Perez had been matching Max's pace without using anything like as much rubber because of how good he is in Sector 1. So jury's out on that one. To me, the lucky people in Baku were the Red Bull pit wall management team, because if that safety car hadn't come out, how would they have handled that situation between Max and Perez? Then the fur would have been flying then, I can tell you. But they were lucky. They were very lucky. The safety car came out and took away the problem for them. Andrew says, how do you think Formula 1 can stop these red flags and safety cars? Well, you can stop people driving into Tech Pro barriers and locking up and hitting guardrails at apices and doing all the things they do, Higher standard of driving required, please. I'm being facetious, but actually I'm being quite serious, because what else can you do? I mean, when people do that and you start crashing cars like that, and it's a street circuit particularly, with Tech Pro barriers need to be in functioning form. What can you do? You got to either stop the race or put the safety car out. And there was a time, of course, when Bernie was saying that's why IndyCar got such good ratings compared with us. We've got to have safety cars. We've got to be able to stop the race whenever we want. Whenever it gets boring, put out a safety car. And so goes back to the whole Bernie Imola 1994 thing. Safety car, yeah. We call them pace cars, and Bernie said, no, we can't call them the same name as Indy. It's got to be a safety car. TJALLILEX. In the post-race interview, Max talked about dealing with the overheated tyres by his driver's style. He said he did try some different things, but it was eventually too late. Yeah, he did. And that is exactly the point, isn't it? Once you get them overheated, there's not a lot that Max or Fernando or Lewis or Charles can do about them. The point is, Sergio didn't get to that point. They didn't overheat on Sergio's car because he was doing the same times through Sector 1 using less rubber than Max. And by the time for Max to repeat that lap after lap, he was using more tyre. So by the time he got to Sector 2, the tyre was overheated. And so then he had to try different things in Sector 2, by which time it was too late. That was the problem. And I don't think he sees it that way even now. I think he sees it that, the tyres overheated and they didn't respond to what I was doing. But they kind of did back into the race, but it was all too late. That wasn't the problem. The problem was, why was Perez, as quick as he was through Sector 1, using less tyre? That was the real issue that Max needs to be looking at. It's not, why did they not respond, or why couldn't he respond when they did overheat? Why did he overheat them compared with Perez? That's the issue. What other races are like Baku in this respect? Well, I think Singapore's got 90-degree corners and traction situations with straights after them. So anywhere where you have that, you've got a place where Sergio Perez is always going to do a really good job. Really good job. It kind of depends, obviously, on the compound that Pirelli are running that weekend. It depends on the ambience, depends on the grip level, depends on a lot of other things. But anywhere where you see that, Perez is going to be good. There's one or two places in Miami, but as I say, it's not as much as Baku. A and B, in Miami, they're going to be running more of a compromised setup on the car. So even Perez is going to have some issues. It's going to dilute things a bit. Monaco, for sure. Where else? Not too many other places, actually. I mean, I wouldn't have said Hungary, for example, because there's anywhere where Perez is going to be good on traction, he's not going to get much benefit from it on the straight, because there aren't many sort of straights after slow corners there. Long straights, anyway. Slow traction corner. I mean, the last corner in Hungary is not what I would call a Perez traction corner. It's a sort of long, constant radius Max Verstappen corner. Spa, no way. Monza, no way. They're just chicanes. It's a different thing. Where else? Austin, a little bit of Austin maybe, a little bit, but there are enough quick S's and enough quick corners and medium speed corners in Austin and flowing corners for Max to be Max. Mexico, yeah, the stadium section coming out of there I suppose he's going to be quite good at looking after the tyres in the stadium section, and he's going to be good out of the hairpin in Mexico and good out of the first chicane in Mexico. It's got a bit of a straight there. So Mexico, actually, I think he'll be, apart from it being Mexico, he'll be really quick in Mexico for that reason, I think. Abu Dhabi, Abu Dhabi, he'll be good. Be another one. But it doesn't add up to a whole season. So, there you go. Turbo GSR Ford, I believe, is the only involved with the hybrid system, no engine work. Yeah, I think that's probably right. And so the engine, the actual normally aspirated engine, will be created by Red Bull Technologies, powertrain technologies, and a lot of that understanding and methodology will be based on what they're doing right now. Alex Beek says, "Hi Peter, is there a possibility that Max will go to Ferrari in the near future?" Let's think about that. If Helmut Marko was no longer doing what he was doing, no. I mean, sorry, let me rephrase that. Helmut Marko is no longer doing what he was doing, which I think would change Max's view a little bit of his racing life. And Adrian Newey officially retired, and he was no longer doing anything at all with Red Bull. And so Christian Horner decided to go and do an IndyCar team in America. I think, or become FIA president or whatever he's going to do. I think Max might well go to Ferrari, but I think it would take those sorts of changes to induce him to go there. As long as Adrian's there, I don't think he would leave. I think he's too bright to leave Adrian Newey. Why would he do that? Andrew King, do you remember Joss's great career? Yeah, I mean, I was around when Joss was racing. Big mates with Michael, wasn't he? Michael and Joss. Joss the boss, he used to call him. BJS, I still think Lando's potentially with those three, but we need to see him in a very quick car. We do. We need to see him in a very quick car, Lando, but we also need to see him rescued from the situation in which he is at the moment, because this will have a debilitating effect on without his knowing it, it'll have a debilitating effect on his natural confidence and ability to be Lando Norris in a very natural way. And that's, you don't need that. The guy's really good. I love watching Lando drive, and I love chatting to him and just hanging out. Not hanging out, but just seeing him do what he does. He's just a real racer. and I think he's great. But it's, at the moment, it's not easy times for him, that's for sure. Darren says he beat Max in the sprint without luck. You're talking about Perez. Yeah, he did. He drove very well under pressure, Perez. A lot of pressure. That was another thing he did really well. Diego Moreno. Baku was fascinating given his ability on 90-degree corners. Should we expect Sergio to be back in Monaco? What about Charles in the Principality? Yeah, well, it's not difficult to predict it there, is it? Charles on the pole, Sergio wins the race. Seen this there before. Good points, Diego. I think as I said, I think Perez will be good at Monaco. I think he'll be good at Singapore. Anywhere where you've got any sort of reward for being very good on traction and looking after the rear tyre as a result is going to be his sort of territory. So you're talking about literally, there's replies going on here about the sprint race and Checo versus Max. Ashok Satyan, you said that Max is comparatively weaker in traction corners. Similarly, what is Lewis's weakness compared to George Bottas in race pace? Well, I don't think he's different. I don't think he's got any weakness compared with Bottas. Nothing against Valtteri, but I don't see one area where he was better than Lewis. I think George is better than Lewis a little bit in the way that Senna was better than Prost in qualifying sometimes. Just incredibly fine, not judgment, just taking it a little bit further. If Lewis is leaving 3 centimeters, I've used this analogy before, George will leave 1.5 on a qualifying lap. And sometimes it'll result in an error, as it did obviously in qualifying for the sprint race in Baku. Beautiful hold though. That when he ran wide there, just absolutely perfect opposite lock, wasn't it? You could see him just feathering the throttle slightly and he got back on. As Gilles Villeneuve once said, when doing that means you're slow and losing time, there's something wrong with Formula One. And Gilles was right. That was a great moment. And in a way, you could say George deserved to be on the pole with that moment he had. But anyway, I think it's just that. I think George, that's the way he's always driven. He's absolutely no margin at all. And sometimes it gets the better of him, as we saw. And I think that's where possibly you could argue he has that over Lewis, but then you could say that's a quality of Lewis, that he doesn't put himself in that position and he's more on top of the car. And very rarely does he make the sort of mistakes that George does when he's right on the edge. The sort of mistakes Lewis makes are standard mistakes, like getting the tyre warm-up wrong, or traffic, not pacing the traffic correctly, or what else would it be? Maybe making a judgment call on setup that the tyre pressures doesn't go the way they think it's going to go. Things like that. But then, George makes the same mistakes like that. So I would say that it's only that, really. And I think, I think Lewis has got a wider palette of operational factors that he can play with than George in terms of his natural ability and what he can do with the car over a period of time. So, and I don't see anywhere where Bottas was better than Lewis. He beat him sometimes because he had a better setup or the race went his way for some reason. But occasionally when Bottas out-qualified Lewis, what would that have been? It didn't happen very often, did it? Usually Bottas was quick. And then it come to qualifying and the track's different and changes and suddenly he lost 2 or 3 tenths. But occasionally he was quick. And yeah, I think, 1 lap, new set of soft tyres, perfect. Lewis has a slight problem, doesn't get the pressures quite right, whatever. Then Bottas was quick enough to beat him. But it didn't amount to much in terms of how you quantify their abilities. Anthony Lazaro. So if you're right and Ferrari, Merc and Aston win the race, as you say, this year will be a worse year for Red Bull despite being much faster. I'd be shocked if Red Bull don't win every race. Well, I'm only saying that because I can't imagine Red Bull halfway through the year are going to be still focusing on this car. Aren't they going to be thinking of the 25 car? 24 car. Where are we? 24 car. Aren't they going to think of next year's car halfway through the year, the same as they did last year? So come, I don't know, whatever, second half of the year after the August break, this car will be kind of put on ice, and they'll put a bit of weight on the car, make sure it's rock steady, rock hard, very reliable, and they'll be focusing on the following year. And at that moment, doesn't that open a door? I mean, last year Ferrari should have taken advantage of that, and they didn't, because the technical directives came in and they went the wrong way and they lost their downforce and tire management went out the window. It helped Mercedes a bit, and they eventually won a race as a result of that. And I think it's that. I think Red Bull, as you're seeing them at the moment, won't be the Red Bull that you'll be seeing back half of the year, because if they won the championship, there's no point in them continuing to develop the car. And not only will they, as I keep saying, not only will they not develop this car, but they will actually make it potentially a bit slower, relatively speaking, because they'll just put a lot of weight on the car in order to not spend any more money on it and just have it finish every race. So that's what I think. El Roto. ELROTO. Okay, let me point out that I don't enjoy crashes, so I never really enjoy Baku, and I usually try to watch the free practice sessions, so this wasn't the weekend for me. No, I don't enjoy crashes, and I'm always, as I said in the video, I'm always nervous in Baku with that ridiculous speed differential they have on that straight there and the length of the straight. I just hate those DRS zones on high speed straights, long straights. I think they're so unnecessary. And we have seen cars touch on the straight in the last couple of years. It's a worry. And I usually do try to watch the FP session, says El Roto. Well, so do I. And so that wasn't the weekend for him. Madeline Poppa, again, Max had a huge hole in his side pod in the sprint race. Yeah, he did. He did well, El Roto says, I spent Saturday watching WEC on Spa and took the sprint as an FP2-3 on the background on my phone. Oh, well, there you go. If that was the Bernie era, imagine what he'd be thinking. People are switching off Formula One to watch WEC. Worse than IndyCar. Stefan S. Max in the last 10 laps after he found the right settings was faster. Was he? Faster than what? Perez? Nah, Perez was just absolutely cruising in the last few laps. No way. I mean, Perez had the race completely in hand. And yeah, Max was getting into it, but he wasn't actually getting on top of the real issue. Where are we here? I made a note of all the sector times of every lap throughout the race. And on the last lap, lap 44, there we go, 50. Let's just have a look. Yeah, lap 51, Perez 37.1, sector 1, Max 37.0. Sector 2, Perez 42.2, purple for the day, Max 42.3, and basically the same in sector 3. So there's no way Max was going any quicker than Perez. All he was doing was kind of getting a balance with his driving, taking into account the overheating tires. So it wasn't a great race for Max at all. I mean, and Perez did 36.9 in sector 1, and Max did a few of those. But Perez just did them with ease, without in any way affecting his tires. Really good. So yeah, I mean, I thought that was I enjoyed the race actually. I enjoyed it because of that comparison. It was quite a technical comparison, but if you watched it sector by sector, lap by lap, it was an enthralling race between those two in a very, very good racing car, both of them. And that's what I liked about that race. Everybody was saying it was boring afterwards. I was astonished, really, because I thought it was a fascinating race. So RJAS69, what happened to the aero after Russell's impact? Performance was still reasonable for second place, despite that. Yeah, I don't quite know what to say about that. I mean, he didn't finish second, and the Mercedes is quite a strong car, quite obviously. I don't know what to say really. I think Mercedes still has more downforce than it has aero efficiency, if you like. Too much downforce. Chris Ward says, we see Max struggle in cars that aren't front end focused. Do we see any driver who doesn't struggle with understeer? I think you're saying he doesn't like understeer, but then who does? This is sort of modern. This is nothing against you. This is the engineers in Formula One. This is modern talk about, front axle. They talk about front axle and rear axle a lot, as if we're going back to live rear axles. But I've never known a driver ever that says, yeah, I love understeer, love understeer. I've known drivers that say, yeah, on very fast corners, I'd rather have slight understeer than flick oversteer or oversteer. Most of them are sort of amateur drivers who just want a little bit of understeer. But I've never known a proper Grand Prix driver who said, yeah, I love understeer. So I just don't get that, to be honest. I know you're quoting what somebody else has said, I think. But Max struggles with understeer. I don't think he struggles. I think he probably does a much better job when he's got an understeering car than most drivers out there, probably better than anyone. But he doesn't like it, that's for sure. Diego Mirino. Can Charles make the front row take lead into Sainte Devote at Monaco and then transform his Ferrari into a big red Cadillac around the Principality as Gilles did in 81? Well, that's what he'll be hoping, that's for sure, Diego. It's a very nice analogy, this Cadillac swishing its way around Monaco, Charles Leclerc in front. Let's think about that. I mean, the problem is the strategy, isn't it? The tyre thing, and even though it'll be a one-stopper probably, you'll find that if it's Red Bull's backed up behind him, they'll be able to run the inevitable 5 laps longer than Charles, I would guess. That's where that whole thing wouldn't happen. It could happen in the way Gilles did without a pit stop, which is what happened in 81. No pit stops, obviously, no tyre changes. But these days, with those stops and the inevitable red flags and safety cars and all that stuff, that Gilles win of 81 isn't going to happen, sadly. Yeah, Max under stress is next level. Showed that. I'm not sure I've answered this question, Angus. If I have, Angus Burston, it's a super chat. Do you think Max is against sprint race weekends due to it being harder to set up a car with? No, I think we have answered that one. Yeah. No, as I said before, I think it's more of a purist thing. He likes to just focus on the Grand Prix weekend, and that's it. Win the Baku Grand Prix. And while I'm at it, what are those medal things they're getting after the sprint race now? They had that great idea of at least giving them a garland, a laurel wreath. That was fabulous. I love that idea. And now they've gone to those medals, which look like, my YouTube thing up there looks nicer than those things. What's that all about? All these medal business. Let's go back to proper trophies. And I've got nothing against garlands. Let's have garlands back again. I love them. I know that they obscure the sponsors, but, come on. Peter M.A. Khan. Peter, Lewis, from my knowledge, has had the best car for more years than any other driver. Is this unique in Formula One history? I wish Nigel had half the amount of dominant cars that Lewis has had. Well, most of the great drivers had very good cars throughout their careers. If you look at Fangio, he started winning in 1950, and he was winning Grand Prix till the end of 1957. And in every one of those years, he was in a championship winning car. Alfa Romeo, and then Mercedes, Ferrari, and then Maserati. So you could argue that he always had a great car. Jim Clark always drove for Lotus. He didn't have a championship winning car in '66 when the 3-litre DFE was not ready and he was running the 2-litre Climax. But other than that, he always had a pretty competitive car, the Lotus Grand Prix car. I mean, Jackie Stewart had pretty good cars for most of his career, apart from 66, the BRM, 66, 67, but the rest of the time he always had a good car. So I don't think, and I think you also have to say that when you've got very quick teammates, it doesn't mean to say that it's an easy ride and it's just, you're going to win every race. And Lewis has always had a very, very fast teammate, one of whom actually beat him to the championship. So that has to be taken into account as well. And you make a good point about Nigel not having a great car until relatively late in his career. But when he had that great car, certainly in 85, 86, 87, he had to beat Keke Rosberg or Nelson Piquet in the other great car. And it was only when he was in 91, 92 in the 14B that he had Ricciardo, which is a sort of very comfortable wingman for Nigel, the sort of Sergio Perez. So, and then Lewis had to beat these guys, and then he got Valtteri, which made life a little bit easier. But then also, very technical age and very good teams all coming up simultaneously. He then had to get the best from Mercedes, and the development path on which Lewis took them because of his pace enabled them to be as good as they were. I think that's another way of seeing it, rather than Mercedes did everything on their own and then just put Lewis Hamilton in the car and isn't he lucky to have had a great car. I think a lot of people like to see it that way. I never see it that way. I think if it's a great car, the driver should always take a lot of credit for having produced that great car. As Nigel in 14B, a lot of what you saw in 1992 in the Active Ride 14B was born of Nigel Mansell's umpteen number of Active Ride failures at Lotus in 1983 when he had the Active Lotus and the thing kept crashing. But that sort of experience, that thread, that flux of what his career had been manifested itself in the beauty of that 14B in 92. And it's the same with Lewis. So, yeah, I mean, other drivers like Fangio is a good example, always had good cars. Alan Prost usually had a pretty good racing car underneath him. Apart from his first year, he was always there in a very, very good car. Michael Schumacher, when was Michael in a bad Grand Prix car? The Jordan, okay, and he drove for one race. After that, he was in pretty good cars, wasn't he, throughout his career? So I think that needs to be seen in that perspective. Rachel Colks, I thought a mandatory 2-stop pit stop at Monaco was a good idea instead of just one. Where overtaking is not possible, an extra mandatory pit stop makes teams use their strategic knowledge to the test. Yeah, but as I say, that's quite a difficult thing to do unless you say you've got to run 3 different compounds in the race. That's the only way you could do that, I think. In a way that would be completely sanitary, because how do you factor in a driver coming in to replace a punctured tyre? Is that actually his second pit stop, or what? How does it work? Or with a penalty, and then you got safety cars, you got all that stuff happening when you can come into the pits anyway. Very difficult. I mean, if you went from making it a 2-compound race to a 3-compound race, that's doable, I guess, but then you're massively increasing the costs for Pirelli and the complications for Pirelli. And as I said earlier in the live stream, Formula One tries to go out of its way to make life as easy as possible for the monopoly tyre supplier, because it's not cheap and it's very complicated to do that job for a tyre company. So I think it'd be difficult to have that unless you made it a 3-compound race. Alan Brown, do Red Bull need to be pegged back, and will Mercedes be competitive when they bring this new concept? Well, I don't think they are going to bring a new concept, are they? From what I keep reading between the lines of Toto's stuff, they're continuing with this car because it's what they know, and that's the Mercedes methodology, not to make knee-jerk reaction changes and copy others. And of course, Red Bull need to be pegged back because that's what the other teams will be thinking. We want to beat them. But as I said, the only way they're going to be pegged back is when they peg themselves back when they've got the championship in the bag halfway through the year, and then they'll go a little bit heavier, and there'll be a slight opening of the door for other teams to come in and maybe do a very good development job back half of the year and win some races. But then that'll be to their detriment building the following car. Big C00077. Hi Peter, what's going on with Valtteri? Looks to be focused on off-track things more. Zoe has arguably been better than him over the last 10 to 12 races. Yeah, I was looking at Valtteri the weekend. He's developed this sort of persona now, hasn't he? The long hair and the moustache, and it's quite cool, I think. You know, he's very different from everybody else. And I thought it was nice that he was the one that presented the Marshall's Award before the race. He's got a great record at Baku. I don't know. I think he's kind of got to that point in his career when he had a really good run at Merck. He won races, and now he's at Alpha, making pretty good money, I guess, enjoying life, being a Alpha Formula One driver. Probably knows that he won't be part of the Audi thing when it happens, and he's just sort of dialing himself down. And when the car's really good, he'll be out there. And when it's a struggle, he probably, isn't going to give it quite as much as Joe would. And that's it's a little bit like, that's why I keep saying Lewis is doing such a good job, because when the car's not brilliant, you'd expect George to be quicker, really, than the 7 times world champion who's been here, done that. And yet Lewis quite often is within a tenth or two of George, which is always quite impressive to see. Very impressive, I think. And that's, you could say it'd be no surprise if Lewis had the sort of mental approach of Valtteri now, but he doesn't. He's still hungry as a dog, going for it. Whereas Valtteri, I think, is kind of, let's enjoy a bit of this life. Lorenz Christopher Kafif says, will Sergio have a chance of winning the championship? Absolutely. He's in a Red Bull RB19. He's in a great team. He's winning races. He's confident. Absolutely. If he should be able to keep the championship alive, assuming Max wins the championship. I don't imagine he'll be clinching that championship from Perez until the last couple of races. As I say, there's no reason for Red Bull to continue development on the car, because they'll be way ahead of everybody else. But in terms of those two, I think they'll be pretty close until go down to the last couple of races, I would think. What Red Bull don't want probably is Max to win clinch the championship in Mexico. That's probably not a good idea. Maybe they need Max to clinch it in Austin again. Or Vegas. There's another one. Peacock 01. We have a lot more street circuits type races this season. That surely benefits Perez. Well, it does if you've got those sections, complete sectors where you've got these traction type corners with long straights after them. And a lot of these slow corners where Perez, a lot of these slow corners don't have long straights. They're just and then to another one. And when it's that, he's got to have a straight in order to show what he's done with his tire management and how good he is. And that's and aren't that many circuits like that. There's about 6 or 7, I think, with a number of those corners. So it doesn't mean just because it's a street circuit, it's necessarily going to play right into Perez's hands. Not that Baku played into his hands. He still had to do an unbelievably good job. And he still had to be very good through Sector 2, which he was, because he actually had the tyres more in the window than Max for most of the weekend there. And still had to be good through Sector 3. I keep saying Sector 3, they're about the same through Sector 3. Sector 3 is a serious part of the racetrack, in Baku. They're all quick corners, blind, a lot of them. And, Perez is really good there as well. But I kind of take that for granted, because with a car that good and a driver that good, you would be that good around there, anyone would be that good in that car around there, providing they're at that level. But it was Sector 1 that was the absolute key for Perez. And there aren't that many Sector 1 clones, if you like, on other tracks. Singapore, as I say, and Monaco in a funny sort of way, but not quite as dramatic as Baku. Darum says Zhou is simply a very good driver. Well, yeah, there you go. Yeah, he's doing pretty good. I think he is. I'm going to qualify that a little bit by saying I think there are a lot of very, very good drivers around now, and I don't think it's that difficult to look pretty good in a Grand Prix car if you're in a team solidly and you're doing a lot of work with the team and you are part of that team over a 2 or 3 year period. It's enough good drivers around now. A lot of them would do that, but he's making good use of it. There's no doubt about that, and he's driving well, and but it says a lot, I think, about the way Formula 2 cars are and the way you can make that transition now. Logan Sargent going as well as he is. I mean, he wasn't the outstanding driver of Formula 2. He was good, but he wasn't the outstanding driver. He looks very good in Formula 1, I think. Same with Zhou, So I think what I'm really saying is, I think if you put Liam Lawson or Jack Doohan or Theo Pourchaire or Fred Vesti into Grand Prix cars where they've got a drive, they know it's their drive for the year, and they're settled and they're doing the testing and the sim and everything else, I think they'd all go very well. Differences obviously between all of them. They're all different guys and drivers and different talents, but they're all there. I think Deruval is another one that would go well, as I've always said. Madeline Popper says, yes, Hamilton had at his disposal the most dominant car in Formula 1 history, in a period in which Mercedes won 8 consecutive, which is unprecedented. Yeah, stats wise you can say that, but I do think, as I said, you've got to be careful about just dismissing Lewis's success as something that was pure car and happened to be in the right car at the right time. It's a lot more than that, and that's a disservice to his talent to do that. Wow, a lot more questions coming in and comments, and I'm not going to get through them all again, and I'm going to say now, because I'm going to have to wind up pretty soon. Apologies to those that I'm not going to get through to, but I will do another live stream after Miami. Somebody agreeing with me about Baku being I thought Slap Hand says, I thought it was a great race as well. Not at all a fan of the Saturday sprint. Took away from the main event. Felt like a bit of a sideshow. Exactly. I totally agree with you, Slap Hands. Thank you. I thought, in Baku it wasn't a bad race at all. And we've done this one. Wow, I'm going to the top now, and there's a lot of... Okay, this is another one from Manuel Jesus Aquila Ramirez. Great name, Manuel. This is another super chat. Am I the only nerd that was excited on Sunday watching the purple clock go from Checo to Max over and over again? No, as I said, I thought it was a great race. It was nothing but tension between those two. And when they're both in the same car, it is real tension. And for me, that was incredible pressure that Perez was under. To have bloody Max Verstappen in your mirrors for the entire race. Well, certainly after the safety car. Not an easy race to drive at all, and he drove it really well. So, very impressive. Very, very impressive. And I enjoyed that race. As I say, it was tension all the way. Fizz IX says Newey plus Max equals inevitable. Yep, I think that's right. I think Newey plus Leclerc equals inevitable, and Newey plus Hamilton equals inevitable. Let's do some of those. Newey plus Russell, probably. Newey plus Norris, probably. There's a lot out there. Newey plus Vettel, for sure, we know. So yeah, but Max, it's just like decrying Lewis for being in the best car. You could say, but Lewis maximised the best car. Max Verstappen has maximised Adrian Newey. Carl595, do you reckon Alonso's brake balance suggestion to Stroll is what caused Stroll to understeer and let Hamilton past? Now, you would say that, wouldn't you? There was I going on about Fernando putting his arm around young Lance and being the good old, aren't I doing a great job here, Lawrence? And please, can I have a wage rise? And can you give me a better car next year. And actually he was leading him into a mistake. Wasn't there a moment also when Lance got on on the radio and said, well, the phone probably, and said, tell Fernando I'm not putting any stress on him or something like that. I'm not pushing him hard or something. And Fernando said, what? Him push me? Kind of, it was supposed to, yeah, right. That was quite funny too. Here's a good one. Big C 007 077. Who's the best number 2 driver? Perez, Bottas or Rubens? You haven't got Ricardo in there. Oops, sorry, Daniel. This is the current. Well, you haven't got the current era because you've got Rubens in there. So where's Mike Spence? Yeah? Where's Trevor Taylor? Where's Clay Regazzoni? Yeah, there's quite a lot of very good number 2s. Where's Lorenzo Bandini? Took out Graham Hill so that John Surtees, his teammate at Ferrari, could win the World Championship. If that's not a good number 2, who is? Out of Perez, Bottas or Rubens, you got to say Perez, I think, out of that. Rubens had that fabulous ability just to get into a rhythm, and he could just repeat lap time after lap time after lap time, just beautiful, flowing laps. Quite long corners, late entries, a bit oversteery periodically, but very good, very, very good. But I don't think he had that sort of extreme talent that Perez has on that specific area. I don't think there were any extreme areas of expertise with Rubens. And he had that, I was going to say weird, it shouldn't be called weird, but by today's standards, weird. He was still a right foot breaker as well. So I'd say Perez out of that lot. But was Perez as good as Lorenzo Bandini? This is the question. Big question. Do a poll on this one, I think. Who's the better number 2, Lorenzo Bandini or Sergio Perez? Don't think we'll get 11,000 applications on that one. How would Schumacher's driving style fare in today's cars? Oh, good. He wasn't brilliant at Merc though, was he? He was okay, but he wasn't the Michael we knew from Ferrari. So, but he'd be fine. He'd love all the technology and he'd be really quick. If Michael was at his peak and you put him in the Red Bull right now, be a serious player for sure. Fernando Menchaca. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Fernando. Hi, Peter. You're the only one that mentioned the difference between Max and Checo was due to the first sector on how they were both performing. I do not think you are biased. Oh, thank you very much. Well, yeah, I didn't do it. I only mentioned that because it was pretty clear evidence to me. And A, what you could see on track, and B, what you could see in the sectors. So I was just, so far as my world is concerned, I was just talking about what to me was evident. And so not a question of being biased. And thank you for saying that. Andrew, Peter, is Formula One too preoccupied with safety with all these safety cars and red flags? No, what it is now, it's well, we have lots of really good Tech Pro barriers everywhere. And I love Tech Pro barriers because they do a good job. But you hit them and it's always a drama in terms of getting them fixed. So I suppose if there's one area of development Formula One needs to look into, it's how they can, it's a bit like, Toyota looking into electric cars and coming up with a new charging system that allows a car to do 350 miles with an 8-minute charge. Then, which I think is the case for the new Toyota road car, from what I've heard. It's a bit the same with Formula One. We need a Tech Pro barrier that can be repaired in 3 minutes. I suppose what it means is new Tech Pro barriers. You've got to have sort of replicate every barrier around the circuit and just immediately replace it. Cost going up. I think it's that. I think it's also a little bit, my comment earlier about I don't think it's that difficult if you're a very good Formula 2 driver to jump into an F1 car and be pretty good. I think the downside to that is that maybe the overall standard of driving in the midfield isn't as high as it could be. And there are a lot of issues going on there. So it's easy for me to say that. And a lot of people will say, oh, yeah, well, But I think you can, people make more mistakes now because they feel they can get away with them, I suppose, is a truism. And if you're going to hit a wall, you're going to hurt yourself or hurt the car. And that's a different thing. And you'd see fewer incidents then for sure. Final question, which is a super chat, top chat. Thank you, Despero F1. Do you think Lewis will be in another championship winning car anytime soon, or do you think he'll just retire in the next few years as a 7-time world champion? I fear the latter. I don't see, the answer to your question is, you're really asking me, do you think Mercedes can win a world championship again inside the window of Lewis's logical career limits? And it's difficult to see that happening, isn't it? It's difficult, even if Mercedes really get it together, it's difficult to see them doing a much better job than Red Bull, and simultaneously Ferrari doing a worse job than both of those two, Mercedes, and Aston Martin not coming anywhere. So, a lot's got to happen for Lewis to be and to beat then George Russell. Imagine this. Just imagine if Mercedes did actually, second half of this year, produced a great car. For whatever reason, it was suddenly right up there with the Red Bulls, actually beating the Red Bulls, out-qualifying them, and they won 5 of the last 8 races. Let's say Mercedes did that. And they went into 20 next year and won, and they have got a car quite capable of winning the World Championship. And imagine if it was George Russell that won the championship and not Lewis in that situation. But of course, that could happen. That could easily happen. If George would have had by far enough experience by then, quick enough, and by law of averages, things could happen to Lewis, things could happen to George. It could go George's way. That would make what happened at Abu Dhabi 21 look tame, wouldn't it, if that happened? Lewis finally has his chance to win his 8th championship that he should have got in 21, and it goes to George. Caramba. Anyway, that could happen. Be ready for it. I'm going to have to end it there, I think. Thank you so much, everyone. Was that another top chat? If it is, I better have a look at it or not. Maybe it might be the same one. I don't know. I think it is. Yeah, I think it is the same one. But anyway, thank you so much for all of you that asked a top chat, if that's the right phraseology, and everybody else who was part of it too, and who made this such a fun 2 hours. Just whizzed by, but it's now 3 o'clock, almost time for the school run. Got to get going. And golf, tennis, all happening, swimming. And I'll be back, of course, with the 3 videos we do over the weekend. Be up really late doing those. So if one of them's a bit shorter than normal, or both of them, or all 3 of them, don't give me a hard time. But I'll be doing the best I can just to sort of sum up what's going on each day in Miami. Should be an interesting weekend. New track surface compared with where we were last year, which throw everybody into a quandary. Nobody knows really what's going to happen with that. As I say, it's a sort of compromised circuit. It's long straights, some tight Perez type corners, but there's also some good medium speed stuff there as well from Max to sort of show what he can do. And I can't see how the Red Bull is going to be anything other than super quick around there. And Miami, first of 3 Grand Prix in the United States of America, because don't forget we have Vegas as well in this season. So there we are. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll do another one of these after Miami, but in the meantime, I'll see you you'll see me on the Friday night. Thanks for watching. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to go into my thing where I can do the nice groovy ending. Here we go. Thanks for watching.